She's like a sickness in my brain, a vision standing by the window pane. She ripples through the blinds and leaves me in a daze. It's in the way her body moves me, the way she grabs me and intoxicates, until the signals in my mind forget to operate. In a fragile skull, I take my pleasure from my alcohol. She'll never give you any time at all. She just comes and goes, you know. And she's got me living in a chemical love, and I try to find the strength to know when she comes back to me again. I'm gonna come up from my hiding.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another coffee and crime time. Author Erica Jong once referred to New York as the city of mirrors, the city of mirages, at once solid and liquid, at once air and stone. And while I was researching today's topic, this quote came to mind, and not only because the place that I was learning about is called the Brooklyn Mirage, but that didn't hurt. Because this summer, rumors have been flying around the concrete jungle. There's been warnings that there's a killer on the loose in the East Williamsburg neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. And the rumors say that this nefarious figure, who operates in the dark, has been using the industrial area around a popular EDM nightclub, the Brooklyn Mirage, as their hunting ground. On June 16th, the body of 27-year-old psychologist Carl Clementi was found floating in the water of Newtown Creek, just a few blocks from the club. The next month, the body of 27-year-old Goldman Sachs senior analyst John Castic was found in the same area. Both Carl and John had been at the Brooklyn Mirage before meeting their untimely deaths, and they were found in roughly the same location, both in Newtown Creek, both dead. And there was another man, a 32-year-old doctor named Michael Batista, who luckily made it out with his life after being abducted after leaving the club on July 21st, 2023. So today we're going to talk about these cases, and we're going to examine the Brooklyn Mirage and the intrigue that has been swirling around it, as well as some very real allegations against the club. And hopefully we can figure out whether these three incidents were just tragic accidents linked together only by their location, with any similarities amongst them being pure coincidence, or if something darker is prowling around the industrial factories of East Williamsburg, waiting to pounce on another unsuspecting clubgoer. But first, before we dive into all of this, and there's a lot, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. Privacy is very important to me because a lot of my life is out there on the internet. A lot of your lives are out there on the internet. And I'm sure, like me, you want to make sure there isn't too much of yourselves out there on the internet because you want to protect yourself. You want to protect your family. Well, every day, thousands of companies are collecting, aggregating, and trading your personal data without you even knowing anything about it. And I'm not just talking about the basic stuff that anybody can find, like your full name, your email address, even your phone number. I'm talking really sensitive information, social security numbers, your home address, your IP information, employment history, even your shopping habits. And it's really scary to think about what someone could do with all of that information. And if these companies are only just selling your data, that's the least of your worries. I really don't want to give anyone that kind of access to me or that kind of power to mess with my life. And don't even get me started on what happens if any of these companies have a data breach. For instance, PayPal is just one of the latest companies to report a massive data breach. And when these things happen, you don't even find out about it until the company notifies you. And by then, it's too late. By then, all your information, including your credit card numbers, banking info, social security numbers, are up for sale on the dark web, and you can't stop it. But there is something you can do. You have the right to request data brokers to delete what information they have about you so that you can protect your privacy. The bad news is, if you were doing it yourself, it would take you years to do this manually. And that's where Incogni comes in. Incogni can do all that long, messy, tedious work for you, automatically. Incogni helps you protect your privacy and get your personal data off the market by reaching out to these data brokers on your behalf, requesting that your personal data be removed and dealing with any objections. Now, I have had issues in the past with identity theft. I don't even want to start talking about it because every time I do, I get like super upset and it ruins my day. But regardless, someone once opened up multiple lines of credit in my name, Home Depot, Walmart, Best Buy, everything. And it took years to fix. It was an actual nightmare. It's still actually kind of the residual effects of it are still happening, and that's why I use Incogni myself. Incogni's even great for, less important issues, like when I Google things for a case. Things that I normally personally wouldn't Google, I'm Googling and I'm looking it up and doing research. But then all of a sudden, I keep seeing ads pop up for all of these weird things that I'm Googling for a case that has nothing to do with me personally. And it's just very unsettling because, as you know, the things that I research can get kind of dark. So Incogni can help you with that as well. And the best part for me is that the Incogni setup process and the use of ease is just very streamlined and seamless. All you have to do is sign up with your email address, and then a number will pop up on your screen showing you how many data brokers Incogni has on its list that are ready to be contacted by them, which I honestly love because I'm a hands-on learner. I like transparency, and seeing that number, it makes me feel like something's already being done and I'm one step closer to being safe on the internet. I love that Incogni is easy to use. There isn't a bunch of clutter on their interface. They tell me what I need to know, exactly and only what I need to know, so I can move on with my day and leave the heavy lifting to them. And then as time goes on, Incogni will keep you updated on what's happening. For instance, for me, after a few weeks, I was notified that 9 data brokers had already deleted my data, and I was able to clearly see that in the Incogni dashboard. It's kind of like having a little personal assistant, which is, I think something that's great, especially for someone like me who doesn't like to ask for help. Incogni doesn't need any validation. Incogni doesn't need me to tell them thank you. They just do what they're supposed to do. So I definitely think you should try Incogni out for yourself. I think everyone can benefit from the service. If you're online, which you are because you're watching me right now, you can benefit from the service. And right now, the first 100 people to click the link in the description box below and to use code stephanieharlowe will get 60% off at Incogni. So start getting your private information wiped from the internet now by clicking the link below or going to incogni.com/stephanieharlowe and use code stephanieharlowe for 60% off at Incogni. Thank you so much to Incogni for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. All right, let's start by talking a little bit about the location and the geography where these crimes took place, which is East Williamsburg. Now, apparently, I had no idea, but this is a hot topic in Brooklyn. There's a lot of debate among locals as to what the geographical boundaries of East Williamsburg are. And I don't want to get in the middle of it. I don't want to offend anybody. All I know is Google Maps has East Williamsburg bounded by Meeker Avenue to the north, Bushwick Avenue to the west, Flushing Avenue to the south, and Newtown Creek to the east. Now, the eastern side of Newtown Creek holds the East Williamsburg Industrial Park, where some of the largest industrial firms in the nation grew up, such as Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, Astral Oil, which would later become absorbed into Standard Oil, as well as Brooklyn Flint Glass, which we now know as Corningware. Familiar names, early industrial giants in our country. Many of these factories and warehouses line the banks of Newtown Creek, a 3.5-mile-long tributary of the East River that forms a border between Brooklyn and Queens. And as soon as I read that it was a tributary of the East River, I knew that Newtown Creek was probably incredibly dirty. I can't believe that there's people who go swimming in the East River. Let me just say that, okay? I live in upstate New York. I've been to New York City plenty of times. The East River is one of the most disgusting bodies of water I have ever been around. All right, so growth around this area boomed in the mid-19th century, and by the 1930s, Newtown Creek had become a major shipping hub, which adds to the pollution, right? And they had freight movement through the creek reaching more than 5.5 million tons, making it one of the most heavily used bodies of water in the Port of New York and New Jersey. Most of what was being transported through here was petroleum, chemicals, and metals. And up until the latter part of the 20th century, industries along the creek, for some reason, had free rein to dump their unwanted byproducts into the water of Newtown Creek, creating one of the most polluted industrial sites in the United States, which is saying a lot because we got plenty of them. An estimated 30 million gallons of spilled oil has made its way into the creek, including runoff from the Greenpoint oil spill, one of the largest oil spills ever recorded in the U.S. And if that wasn't bad enough, Newtown Creek also contains raw human sewage from the New York City sewer system. In some places, there are 15 to 25 feet thick layers of polluted slime on the creek bed, and Newtown Creek was designated a Superfund site in 2009. So a Superfund site is basically like an incredibly toxic, polluted area that the EPA has decided they're going to designate time, funds, and energy into cleaning up. However, this area, Newtown Creek, has kind of been a Superfund site like for decades, and they don't plan to even start the cleanup of this until at least 2032. So we got another decade or two of waiting because you know how things in New York City work. They don't happen always on time. The creek begins near the intersection of 47th Street and Grand Avenue, and it empties into the East River at 2nd Street and 54th Avenue in Long Island City. And English Kills is the source of the creek. And it is known as Newtown Creek's Heart of Darkness because English Kills is the most polluted, most toxic part of the most contaminated waterway on the east coast of the United States. And you might be wondering, is this just Stephanie talking about stuff she's interested in? Is this just Stephanie who went down a rabbit hole and found out a bunch of cool stuff about Newtown Creek? Or is this relevant? Is this connected? Well, a little bit of both, right? There's actually so much about Newtown Creek and like the development of Brooklyn and even the East Williamsburg area around Newtown Creek that I found out when I was researching. There's a lot of cool history sites that are dedicated to New York City because New York City has, I think, some of the most illustrious history in our country. But it is also connected, right? It definitely is. Because just a few blocks away from this toxic creek is the Brooklyn Mirage, an EDM nightclub at the site of a former lumberyard on Stewart Avenue in East Williamsburg. Now, the Brooklyn Mirage is actually the name of the outdoor area of a 3-venue space called Avant Gardener. And these 3 venues are the Mirage, the Great Hall, and King's Hall. Now, according to Avant Gardener's website, the Brooklyn Mirage is a breathtaking open-air sanctuary in the heart of the Avant Gardener complex. The inner courtyard is a totally immersive space surrounded by towering walls lined with evergreen plants and a captivating 200-foot LED wall. A singular catwalk connects a network of expansive outdoor environments and rises to surround the venue, offering views of the iconic city skyline and bustling courtyard below. The Great Hall is referred to as the quintessential Brooklyn warehouse venue, a massive soaring space with exposed beams and brick walls which evoke a familiar industrial aesthetic with an array of moving lights shining down from the high ceilings and a 2-level platform giving patrons a viewpoint over the Great Hall's enormous dance floor. And King's Hall seems to be an event space with a massive chandelier, an abundance of natural light shining in through the glass-ceilinged panels, and a world-class KV2 sound installation, making it the ideal place for a wedding or charity gala. Together, these 3 separate areas make up the largest standing room entertainment complex in North America, and Avant Gardener occupies an entire city block in East Williamsburg. So it's quite expansive, it's quite large, they got a lot going on there. We're going to talk more about Avant Gardener and their history and their relationship into history with New York City politicians and New York City in general. We're going to talk about all of that in a little bit. But first, let's talk about the 2 men who went missing after leaving the Brooklyn Mirage, only to turn up dead floating in the nearby Newtown Creek days later. On June 11th, 2023, 27-year-old Carl Clementi arrived at the Brooklyn Mirage for the Excision show. Excision is like a musical group. So Carl and his friends, they got there shortly after 9 p.m., and most of the group was able to gain entry into the club with no issue, but security refused to let Carl inside, claiming he'd been drinking alcohol that night. I don't get this part of the story. It's reported everywhere in regards to Carl Clementi's case. I just don't understand it because they serve alcohol at the nightclub, and a lot of people club hop, a lot of people go from venue to venue or club to club, and it's likely that they may have consumed some alcohol before arriving to the club. You know, we like to pregame. I know me and my girls always used to have a couple of drinks while we were putting on our makeup and getting ready and listening to music before going out. So they didn't say he was intoxicated. They didn't say he appeared to be intoxicated. They didn't say he was violent or aggressive or acting out or, like verbally abusive to the staff. They just said that he'd been drinking alcohol that night. So if he was really, really intoxicated to the point where security felt Carl's entry into the club would cause problems, they should report it that way. Otherwise, it's just very vague, and I am not sure what they mean by that. To not allow him to go in at all, he must have been quite intoxicated. However, that hasn't been reported. The next day, a friend of Carl's made a Facebook post asking if anyone had seen him since Carl had not returned home the previous night after leaving the Mirage. The post stated that surveillance camera footage had been viewed and showed Carl's movements after leaving the club. He was last seen walking on Meserole Street towards Varick Avenue. He turned right and proceeded down Varick Avenue towards Meadow Street, and presumably he continued on to Metropolitan Avenue. Now, it was believed that he was probably headed to the Sunoco gas station, which is on the corner of Varick and Metropolitan, and he would have been headed there somewhere between 10:20 and 10:40 p.m. And this gas station was a common place for patrons of that nightclub to go and get drinks and snacks while they would wait for their Uber or Lyft, because apparently the Brooklyn Mirage is located in an area that's meant for manufacturing. So there's large portions inside and outside the club that are dead zones for cell service. And this causes many people who are trying to get home after a night of drinking and dancing to have to walk a few blocks before they can get enough service on their phones to access their ride share apps. And the path Carl took is reportedly also the typical path that many club patrons would walk when leaving the venue, whether they're headed to the subway, which is between an 11 and 15-minute walk away, or whether they're trying to get service to call a car. So Carl's family had also discovered that his cell phone had data usage until 11 p.m., but it didn't appear that he had called an Uber or Lyft because there was no charges on his credit card. Now, a few days after this, Carl's wallet was found at a nearby lumber yard, and it was turned into the NYPD, causing law enforcement to pull footage from the lumberyard's surveillance cameras, footage that would be both mysterious and chilling. And this surveillance footage showed Carl running through the lumberyard. A later search of the property uncovered Carl's body floating face down in the English kills behind the lumberyard. What I think is odd is we haven't seen this surveillance footage unless something has changed since I did research for this case a couple of days ago. I couldn't find it anywhere, and I find that odd because they did release some footage of the next person. We're going to talk about John Castic, but nothing from Carl Clementi, which is showing him walking along this route, which is showing him running through the lumberyard. I think that footage would help us to figure out what kind of state of mind Carl was in. Was he very intoxicated? Was he unsteady on his feet when he was walking? Was he kind of swerving around? Was he falling? What was going on with him? And I guess I just don't understand why we don't at least have stills from these surveillance videos when clearly the NYPD doesn't have any problems releasing surveillance footage from John Castic's evening after he left the Mirage. So now we will talk about John. The following month after Carl Clementi's death, 27-year-old John Castic was found shirtless, floating in the English Kills 3 days after he left the Brooklyn Mirage alone after attending a Zed's Dead concert there on July 29th, 2023. And Zed's Dead, just as a side note, is amazing. So I definitely think that you guys should check them out if you like this type of music. You probably already have if you like this type of music. So it appears that John left the venue on foot around 2:30 a.m. He was wearing a shirt at the time he left, obviously, because he went into the club, he saw the show. I don't think that they're going to let you into the club without a shirt on, and I did check the FAQs on Avant Gardener's website just to make sure, and yes, a shirt is required to enter the club. There's a dress code. Surveillance cameras also captured John Castic that night, but apparently this footage does not show him running. It doesn't show him in any state of distress. He was walking normally. He didn't appear to be impaired by drugs or alcohol in any way. John's phone registered his location at 3:51 a.m. at the Metropolitan Bridge before it lost battery or it was shut off. Now, the Metropolitan Bridge is a small, movable drawbridge that spans the English Kills and connects Grand Street to Metropolitan Avenue. It's about an 8-minute walk from the Brooklyn Mirage. We don't really know what John Castic was doing in the roughly 80 minutes between when he left the club and when his phone pinged at the bridge. But we do know his body was found floating not far from where Carl Clementi was found and that he was shirtless. And I want to just mention something here, touch on something that I noticed, which is Carl Clementi went to the Brooklyn Mirage a little bit after 9. It appears he was turned away and he kind of started walking around 10. That's when he was walking down his path between 10:20 and 10:40. It makes more sense that somebody in New York City who couldn't get into one club may kind of walk around and see if there was anything else to do, see if, he could find another bar to go into or whatever before going home, because it was much earlier in the night. But John Castic left the club at 2:30 a.m. after the show. And you'd think at that point, he works for Goldman Sachs. He's a senior analyst. He probably wants to get home, get some sleep. It's 2:30 in the morning. Everything else is going to be closing down. He wouldn't be walking around looking for something to do. He would most likely be, walking to his vehicle or walking to a place where he could get service so that he could call an Uber or a Lyft. So what was he doing in that 80 minutes? Where was he? Where was he going? The police haven't released John Castic's path. They haven't said where it appeared he traveled. And so we don't know. Now, John's father, Jeffrey Castic, has told Fox News that he's spoken to the city's medical examiner and, quote, the coroner's office has confirmed that he drowned, end quote, referring to his son John. And although the ME is still awaiting toxicology results, the police have reportedly told Jeffrey Castic that they believe his son was impaired by drugs and or alcohol at the time of his death. And once again, how do they know this? Because the surveillance footage of John Castic doesn't make it seem like he's impaired at all. So did they talk to John's friends? Did they talk to bartenders at the Mirage that night? Did they pull John's tab from that night to see how much he had consumed as far as alcohol? Were they aware of drugs that he took from interviews with people who knew him or with people who were with him that night? I don't know. But either way, I will say once again, it doesn't appear that he's impaired in any way on the surveillance footage. Carl Clementi's father, Alexander Clementi, has said that he's still awaiting the results of an autopsy and toxicology reports, which is weird because Carl died a month before John Castic. So how do John Castic's parents have some answers, but Carl Clementi's parents do not? And Alexander Clementi says he feels something just doesn't make sense in his son's death, stating, quote, I will accept that it was an accidental death. Okay, he fell in the water. But what caused it? Why was he running? It's like a movie. There's no such thing as a movie where it's the beginning and the end. You have to see the whole movie, end quote. And what he's saying here is we're missing something, right? We're missing something. What happened between when Carl Clementi was just walking, maybe to the gas station, maybe to get an Uber or Lyft, and when he's running through this lumberyard? Why would somebody be running? Why would they be running through a lumberyard they'd never been to before? You wouldn't go further into industrial areas if you were just trying to get someplace quick. You would be running into more public, well-traveled areas. You'd be running to, catch an Uber because maybe your Lyft's coming and you know that they're arriving the pickup destination and you're not there yet. Maybe you'd be running for that reason, but it seems more like Carl Clementi was running from something, right? Because he's running further into a isolated industrial area where there's no help for him. Several of John Castic's friends have also spoken up, even though John Castic's father, Jeffrey, seems to be strangely accepting of this, accidental death, doesn't have a lot of questions, at least not publicly. John's friends have said, no, we think he may have encountered foul play because he just wasn't the type of person to do anything crazy. Now, we know John Castic loved EDM. He loved music festivals. He loved these types of things. He'd be the type of guy to go to the Electric Zoo Festival. He'd be the kind of guy to go to Bonnaroo. He was that type of guy. He did these things. But there is not really a lot of supporting information to say that John Castic was a drug user or would often overindulge in substances. Carl Clementi's father, Alexander, is wondering why it took another death before the world took notice of what had happened to his son. And it is very strange because there's not a lot of reporting out there about Carl. I read everything I could about Carl and his situation. There's much more publicity and media attention given to John Castic. And Alexander Clementi said, quote, "When you lose one person in such circumstances, it's too much. If you lose a second person, it's unbearable. Why did we wait?" End quote. And for its part, the NYPD has been very tight-lipped about these two cases, only saying that they do not believe foul play was at hand, and they do not believe that the deaths of Carl Clementi and John Castic are connected, and they refer to them as tragic coincidences. After reporting of these two deaths became widespread, another bizarre occurrence connected to the Brooklyn Mirage emerged. And this kind of came out on, I think it was on TikTok. That's when I started to hear about Michael Batista. And forgive me if sometimes I giggle a little bit. This is not a funny situation. This is horrible. And I'm sure that Michael Batista is going to be recovering from this mentally for a long time. But I do have a weird thing that happens in my head sometimes when we talk about darker things that don't necessarily lead to death. So if the victim was, able to get out alive, and just I don't know how to explain this without, sounding like a dick. Just the circumstances of what happened to Michael Batista on the night that he was abducted outside of the club seem ludicrous. And so sometimes I will just kind of giggle just about the ridiculousness of the entire situation, because I see things playing out in my head almost like a movie. And I can't stand it sometimes. I can't. It's just it's so ridiculous. So on July 21st, 32-year-old Connecticut doctor Michael Batista was abducted after leaving the club. He was trying to hail a cab a few blocks away. Reportedly, when Batista got into the cab, there was already another passenger inside, 42-year-old self-proclaimed club promoter Anthony Benjamin. And Anthony Benjamin, as we will come to find, is quite the character. Quite the audacious character. So Michael Batista told the cab driver, "Hey, bring me to my car just a few blocks away where I parked." But the driver of the cab, who allegedly was in league with Anthony Benjamin, the club promoter, he refused to take Michael Batista where he wanted to go. Instead, the cab driver was like, "Yeah, we're not going to go to your car. I'm going to drive you to an after-hours club in Manhattan." And apparently, Michael Batista could do nothing but sit in the cab in complete confusion as he was driven out of Brooklyn. And when they arrived to their destination in Manhattan, he and the cab driver began to argue when the driver demanded money from Batista, who refused to pay. And so then the cab driver, attempted to punch Michael Batista. And at that point, Anthony Benjamin, who I guess is an imposing figure, he's over 6 feet tall, he's over 200 pounds, he seems strong or whatever. So Anthony Benjamin, the club promoter, he steps in and diffused the situation, prevented the cab driver from hitting Michael Batista. But then he turned to Batista and he was like, "Yeah, so I'm actually the promoter for this event, this after-hours Manhattan party event, and you should just pay this cab driver, and then we're going to go into the club and have fun." So wanting to get out of the situation, Batista followed Benjamin's directions. And when they entered the club, Benjamin informed Michael Batista that Michael was now under his protection. And he motioned to his waistband, telling Michael that he was packing, which means he had a gun, right? That's allegedly what that means. It's not allegedly what that means. It's definitely what it means. Now, I don't know if he actually did have a gun. he said he did. I don't know if he did. Now, it's unclear how long Benjamin and Batista were inside of this club, but at some point, Michael Batista left. He walked out of the club. He was like, I'm done with this bizarre situation. I've had enough of this fever dream. And he started walking down the street, trying to get another cab to once again bring him to his car, which was back in Brooklyn. But Anthony Benjamin followed him, just like left the club with him, wouldn't let him out of his sight, followed him down the street, and then he got into the taxi that Batista flagged down. Now, I don't know why at this point Michael Batista didn't tell the cab driver, this guy's like stalking me. Maybe he was afraid because he knew Anthony Benjamin had a gun, or he thought he did, and he didn't know what Benjamin was capable of. Maybe by that time he had PTSD and he was never going to trust a cab driver again. I don't know, but the cab driver drove Michael Batista and Anthony Benjamin to Batista's car back in Brooklyn, and then Anthony Benjamin allegedly forced Michael Batista to drive him to the Bronx, which is apparently where Anthony Benjamin lived. And during the drive, Benjamin informed Batista that he had put people in body bags before, and he would do it again. And allegedly, jokingly, Benjamin said, quote, "If you do anything funny, I'll kill you," end quote. That's a funny joke, right? Got a dark sense of humor on him. So Anthony Benjamin, the club promoter, he then had Michael Batista stop at several ATMs and withdraw nearly $1,000 in cash, which Benjamin then proceeded to hand out to his friends in the neighborhood. Benjamin then brought Michael Batista to a bunch of places: Mario's Pizzeria, Hollywood Delights, Freckles Juice, Family African Meat Market, where he purchased over $570 in food with Batista's money. After that, the unlikely duo went to Foxy Fitness and Pole, where Batista was forced to spend another $1,100. I don't know what he spent $1,100 on at this place, because this is supposedly a pole dancing place where you learn to work out and dance on the pole. And I don't know what these two people, Benjamin and Batista, would be doing there at night that they're spending $1,100. Is this a front for something more nefarious? What happened there? What did you buy for $1,100? Did you buy a lifetime membership at Foxy Fitness and Pole? Why would you do? I don't understand. But then Anthony Benjamin also brought his new forced best friend to the barbershop so that Benjamin could get his hair cut on Batista's dime, of course. Anthony Benjamin then purchased $1,700 worth of shoes from Foot Locker. He bought an $1,800 hat. One hat was $1,800. And when all of that was said and done, Anthony Benjamin had forced Michael Batista to go on a $6,000 shopping spree, gifting everything to Benjamin. Finally, in the early morning hours of Sunday, July 23rd, Michael Batista told Anthony Benjamin, "Listen, I'm on call today at the hospital, and if I don't show up, people are going to get suspicious. They're going to report him missing. It's not like me to not show up for my shift when I'm on call." So Anthony Benjamin then reportedly hired one of his friends, 50-year-old Steve Daly of Mount Vernon, New York, to drive Michael Batista's manual car to the hospital in Norfolk, Connecticut, where Michael Batista worked, and apparently Anthony Benjamin couldn't drive a stick shift, so he had to pay somebody to do it, probably with Michael Batista's money. And the three men arrived at the hospital around 4 a.m. Sunday morning. Now, Anthony Benjamin wanted to escort Michael Batista inside, and Michael Batista was like, "That's weird. Why would you be in the hospital with me at 4 a.m.? And Benjamin was like, "Well, just tell everyone that I'm there to see a doctor. I'm there to receive medical care." But Batista told his captor that the hospital wasn't going to allow him in without the proper credentials. So Michael Batista was like, "Listen, I'll go talk to security. I'll see if I can't pull a few strings. I'll see if I can't get you inside." And Michael Batista did go and talk to security, at which point he informed them that he'd been kidnapped. He pointed out his car in the parking lot where the two men were still sitting, waiting for him to apparently come back and be like, "Benjamin, it's all good. You can come in with me." At that point, the security of this Connecticut hospital locked the hospital down, called the police, and then Anthony Benjamin and Steve Daly were promptly arrested. Now, are these three incidents connected? Carl Clementi, John Castic, and Michael Batista. I don't think Michael Batista is connected to Castic or Clementi. I think the fact that if somebody did do something to Carl Clementi or John Castic, the fact that their bodies were found very close to the club in the same area would sort of dispute that, unless Anthony Benjamin was planning to just milk Michael Batista for everything he had and then bring him back to the place where he'd picked him up, which was, by the Brooklyn Mirage in East Williamsburg, and then, drowned him in the water, the creek, Newtown Creek. Maybe that's possible. But I also know that this is actually quite common, right? The fact that these people claiming to be club promoters will hang out outside of places like the Brooklyn Mirage and take advantage of the patrons who are coming out, who are like drunk or high, and kind of take them to other places. So I don't know if all three of these incidents are connected, but I know the Brooklyn Mirage and the area around it have a lot of problems like this. Many Brooklyn residents living in the industrial East Williamsburg neighborhood where the Brooklyn Mirage is located have been demanding elected officials in law enforcement to do something about the number of suspicious and exploitative people in the area. An online letter addressed to Councilwoman Jennifer Gutierrez has been circulating on social media since August 1st, and the author writes, quote, "As a member of the live music community, I have serious concerns regarding the safety of concert attendees at the Brooklyn Mirage, and it has come to my attention that there is extreme negligence by the venue and their security team regarding the safety of patrons exiting the venue," end quote. The letter lists a number of concerns, alleging that the venue has been exceeding its capacity significantly, is saying that there's a lack of security surrounding the venue. There aren't enough lights on the roads and pathways that lead to the train station. There's always a worry of unpermitted drivers posing as ride shares and aggressive club promoters surrounding the area preying on concert goers who are under the influence in order to lure them to unidentified after-hours spaces and, get money out of them, make them feel scared, make them feel like I've been taken, and this person's telling me that they're not going to let me go until I give them this money, so I'm going to give them their money. It's extortion. Others online have chimed in, stating that the Mirage needs to make changes in order to keep people safe. Changes such as allowing re-entry so that people can wait for their Uber or Lyft inside. And a user going by the name Renegade Master tweeted out, quote, "More lights outside, more cameras, better security, and for fuck's sake, free Wi-Fi. Many of us no longer get any service here and are forced to walk blocks to call Ubers. Please do something. People are dying and the community is hurting," end quote. And I agree with this. If you don't have cell service in your area and you've got people there who are under the influence of drugs, alcohol, it's late at night, that there's predatory, people around trying to take advantage of your patrons, you should offer free Wi-Fi. You should offer free Wi-Fi all over that bitch, and you should let people wait inside. And if you don't want to allow re-entry, because re-entry is explicitly not permitted according to Avant-Gardener's website, if you don't want to allow re-entry because you're afraid people are going to go outside, take a bunch of drugs, come in and act a fool, then have a separate area like a security office where you can secure them in, where you can watch them, have somebody sit with them and keep an eye on them, and allow them to sit in there and wait for their rides. There's no reason why you should just be sending people out into the night, into an area that has no cell service, expecting them to just find their way home. Many others have chimed in on this conversation, agreeing, stating that they don't get service at the Brooklyn Mirage. They can't call an Uber. They can't even let friends know where they are, when they left, or what they're doing. And I'm going to refer to an article on curbed.com. And I have to say, this was a very well-written, information-packed article written by Brock Collier, who goes by the Unhappy Femme on Twitter. I really, really enjoyed this article and Brock's writing style, and I applaud them for going above and beyond in their reporting. It was exactly, I feel like, the kind of article that I would write. There was enough creative flourishes, enough, descriptions that activate my visual movie making in my head, and a lot of information and a lot of resources that I could link to. And so I will link this article in the description box for anyone who wants to check it out. It's titled, "Is There a Serial Killer Stalking the Brooklyn Mirage? Or Maybe This EDM Club is Just Too Big and Messy." And in this article, Brock writes, quote, "Brooklyn Mirage is arguably, just by its sheer size and isolated location, particularly potentially perilous. It's a 15-minute walk to the subway, even when you're not woozy, in a neighborhood of spotty cell service crisscrossed with a Superfund site canal. Wander off, and there is nobody around to hear you scream. Late at night, walking around can, at the very least, feel creepy. I have spent probably too much time in the generally underpopulated party zones of Bushwick and East Williamsburg in the late night, early morning hours in the past few years. The warehouses and all the assorted heavy equipment on the street when it's the middle of the night and you're on a whimsical chemical gives all kinds of pleasingly Mad Maxy nightlife fantasy attributes. Come back during the day, however, and it's clear that it's just a mirage. It smells like literal garbage because this is where waste goes, and it's not an easy area to walk in or bike around with slanty sidewalks and potholed streets, end quote. So Brock, while they were looking into these allegations of a serial killer stalking the Brooklyn Mirage, they were walked around the area of the Brooklyn Mirage and the industrial area of East Williamsburg by Leah Archibald, who's the executive director of the Evergreen Exchange, and the Evergreen Exchange supports manufacturing businesses in the neighborhood. So Brock also spoke to several employees and business owners who'd become used to drunk people stumbling around at night, causing all sorts of trouble. Adam Friedman, the owner of a recycling facility down the street from the club, explained how one time a patron of the Mirage had broken into his building and punched one of his employees. Every morning, these people come in to do their jobs, and they're just like walking around piles of vomit, drug paraphernalia, garbage, litter, just stuff that these drunk people leaving the club and leaving these EDM shows kind of just scatter around the area because this isn't where they live. This isn't where they're from. In fact, from what I could tell, the Brooklyn Mirage attracts a lot of out-of-town people, not like far out of town, but, people from Jersey, stuff like that, not necessarily people from the Brooklyn area, not necessarily even people from Manhattan. It's more of kind of like a touristy area, just like one of those places that you have to go, one of those places you have to see if you're in Brooklyn. But yeah, the patrons leaving the club are just not super respectful to the businesses in the area, and they're also not necessarily being cautious because there's plenty of risks to the patrons themselves if they're wandering around drunk or high on drugs in the middle of the night in this very dangerous industrial zone that's riddled with open freight tracks, potholes, heavy machinery, chemicals, and obviously the toxic Newtown Creek. Now, it seems that when Avant Gardner, who, remember, that's the complex that the Mirage is part of. When Avant Gardner came to town, the city was sort of split on how they felt about such a large enterprise making its home in the East Williamsburg industrial zone. According to this very well-written Curbed.com article by Brock Collier, Avant Gardner was founded by two party promoters from Zurich, Jürgen Billy Beldstein and Philip Weiderker. I'm not going to say those names again, so from here on out, I will refer to them as Billy and Philip if I have to talk about them again, because I know I butchered that. So these two people, Billy and Philip, they started a company called City Fox as an underground events company in Switzerland. And when they moved their business to New York City in 2011, they were plagued by issues from the start. It seemed that they kind of wanted to appear to be, like I said, very underground, counterculture, very much on the edge. This isn't your mother's nightclub. Anything could happen if you come to our parties. And they started hosting these underground parties, and they quickly attracted a very loyal following amongst, the people in New York City and outside of the island, because they advertised an immersive club experience that would feel like the perfect nightclub built for one night only. So these are the kind of underground parties where they'll just pick random, abandoned locations to throw a rave in, and then, the next day it'll be like it never happened. Very Fight Club. In 2015, the two men, Philip and Billy, they attempted to throw a Halloween party at the abandoned Newhart Plastics factory in Greenpoint. However, this building had also been deemed a Superfund site, and the party was shut down by the fire department before it even began, which, as it turns out, was probably a good thing for anyone who planned to attend, because according to a former member of Brooklyn's Community Board 1, quote, "There were drums of chemicals on the property. It's toxic. These are nasty chemicals. No one should have been in that place," end quote. In 2016, Avant-Gardener began throwing parties in their current location, the 80,000 square foot lot located at 140 Stewart Avenue in East Williamsburg, and these events were also shut down after it was decided they were imminently perilous to life and full of combustible materials and other fire hazards. Because remember, this was an old factory. The location of Avant-Gardener Complex was an old factory. So Avant-Gardener submitted a plan to the community board, Brooklyn Community Board number 1, before opening their permanent venue in 2017. And they basically told the community board their vision for this complex, which they called the venue that Brooklyn deserves. And they predicted that it would generate $3.5 million in tax revenue each year. And the venue that Brooklyn deserves was probably a less appealing sales pitch than the $3.5 million in tax revenue, which is usually all politicians need to hear in order for them to agree to something or anything. They'll agree to anything if the money's right. So attached to the proposal was a security plan stating, quote, "The venue is committed to the safe, secure, and efficient arrival and departure of its patrons and staff with no or minimal inconvenience to the occupants in the surrounding neighborhood and minimal impact upon emergency service resources," end quote. So basically, they're saying like, okay, we're not going to cause problems for the people who live here. Like, we'll have a curfew, we'll keep it quiet. I don't know why they thought anyone would believe that they would keep it quiet. It's like 3 venues. They're all blasting music with their state-of-the-art sound systems. Ow. Anyways, and they're also saying, like, we're not going to have a huge impact on emergency service resources. So that means, like, the police, the fire department, ambulances. They're saying it's going to be chill, all right? We're not going to need the police out here all the time. We're not going to need, paramedics rushing in here and saving people who have hurt themselves or overdosed or whatever. And it turns out that wasn't true. But we'll talk about that in a minute. Part of this security plan proposed by Avant-Gardener included bringing patrons from the club to the L train. And it seems at one point the security team at the Brooklyn Mirage was doing this, and they even had security guards posted along the route from the club to the subway. But it seems they no longer do this, obviously. In 2016, the Brooklyn Community Board 1, they denied Avant-Gardener support for their liquor license. The Brooklyn Community Board was really never on board with Avant-Gardener coming into the area, even though there were numerous letters of support for the venue that had been written by local residents, business owners, and even Eric Adams, who at that time was, I believe, the borough president in Brooklyn, but who is now the mayor of New York City. And I know that I have people who are watching this who live in New York City and who have their opinions on Eric Adams. You either love him or you hate him, right? But one thing does not change. He is the mayor. And although it seemed that some of these local businesses and residents who initially threw their support behind Avant-Gardener would come to change their minds, Eric Adams never did. A letter from Adams' office stated, quote, "We discussed certain events that transpired in the past. We are confident that it will provide several significant benefits to the local community in Brooklyn," end quote. So they're saying, like, yeah, we know about the multiple issues Avant-Gardener has already created, but we think that their presence in East Williamsburg is going to be beneficial to the community in Brooklyn. And like their tax revenue that they claim they're going to bring in is going to be beneficial. Basically, that's what I think. Allegedly, don't come for me. However, the Brooklyn Community Board was not convinced, with one member who has preferred to remain anonymous saying, quote, "A lot of people were really concerned about the scale of the operation. They already had a very bad reputation," end quote. Unfortunately, the community board, who's supposed to be put into place, these are regular citizens supposed to be put into place to protect their interests and the other, community interests in their community. So they're supposed to represent the people who live in this area. Although they were put into place to do that, the community board can only make suggestions and recommendations to the state liquor authority board, who are ultimately the ones that decide whether or not businesses get their liquor license. And the SLA did agree to give Avant-Gardener their liquor license, although it appeared Even some people at the SLA, the State Liquor Board, had their reservations, with a member of their board warning Avant-Gardener during an April 2017 meeting, quote, "There's not going to be a lot of leeway here if something goes wrong. I know there's going to be significant money invested in this venue, but I will not hesitate to yank this thing. I'm putting my neck on the line with guys that I'm not 100% comfortable with," end quote. Now, it's funny that the SLA would have this position. Like, we're giving you your liquor license, even though we're not 100% comfortable with the two owners of Avant-Gardener, and we're going to take it away from you in an instant, he said, as soon as things start going wrong. And in the future, the SLA and Avant-Gardener would butt heads multiple times. There would be so many issues happening at the Brooklyn Mirage that the SLA would, try to go in and try to do something about it and try to interfere, but they were constantly fighting against the politics of New York City, specifically, once again, Eric Adams and others that Eric Adams would bring in to also support Avant-Gardener. So since the SLA gave Avant-Gardener their liquor license, Avant-Gardener and the SLA have not had the most amicable relationship, with the SLA hitting the Brooklyn Mirage with a $100,000 fine in May of 2020 for a number of violations. We're going to talk about some of them in a moment. And at that time, the SLA appointed an independent monitor to oversee the club's operations. But 3 years later, in our current time, when we're talking about all of these things happening, it doesn't appear that that independent monitor is in place any longer. Now, over the past 5 years, the SLA have repeatedly voiced concerns about what they've called rampant drug use at the Mirage. Last year, small bags and wrappers collected at the venue tested positive for methamphetamine, cocaine, ecstasy, heroin, and more than 1,600 people were treated at the venue for intoxication or for an altered mental state from 2018 to 2022. At least 66 people had to be transported to hospitals during that same period, and this includes a period during which they were shut down for COVID for a year and a half, right? And so it does seem that the Brooklyn Mirage, despite what they said, has become kind of a drain on emergency resources in New York City. Some might say that the amount of services that they need from the police, from the hospitals, from the ambulances might kind of make a dent in that $3.5 million tax revenue that they're promising to bring the city. Now, 3 people have died from accidental drug overdoses during separate events, and Avant-Gardener has responded to all of this, claiming that it's not as bad as everyone's making it out to be. They are being targeted by the SLA. They're being unfairly targeted by the SLA. They're trying to make it into like a David and Goliath situation. And then when Avant-Gardener's liquor license came up for renewal in May of 2023, the SLA was like, finally, we now have the chance to, yank this from you in an instant, like we said we would. But the SLA encountered problems when Mayor Eric Adams again threw his support behind the owners, Billy and Philip, even going so far as to organize a meeting between them and top aides to Governor Kathy Hochul, including Catherine Garcia, who was a former mayoral candidate who now oversees, you guessed it, the State Liquor Authority. Now, according to Gothamist, the governor's office would not reveal specifics about the meeting, but records showed that Avant-Gardener shared documents accusing the SLA of harassing their business and looking for a way to harm their business or shut them down. Now, why was this meeting that Eric Adams arranged for Avant-Gardener and, top aides to the governor of New York and the person who oversees the SLA, why is that kind of weird? Why is that kind of like icky and seems like maybe a little bit of political corruption? I'm not saying it is political corruption. Some people have said that. But why is it kind of taboo for this to happen? Well, Eric Adams is showing favoritism to a certain business, whereas he doesn't always necessarily go as hard for other businesses, smaller businesses maybe, that don't bring in as much tax revenue. Like, would he put his neck on the line like this for a mom and pop convenience store? Would he go out of his way like this for a family-owned restaurant? Probably not, in my opinion. Eric Adams and the mayor's office has multiple times publicly supported Avant-Gardener since the very beginning, and they've disputed the SLA's characterization of the complex as a haven for drug activity, with Fabian Levy, who's Mayor Eric Adams' spokesperson, praising the venue's safety protocols and highlighting the NYPD's positive relationship with the business and the owners, who he claims are always willing to assist in police investigations tied to the venue. Well, like, why wouldn't they be? The whole point was Avant-Gardner has said, listen, you're not going to need to send a lot of emergency resources here. They didn't say like, yeah, you're definitely going to need to waste a ton of resources and emergency services on us, but we're always going to be happy to cooperate in the investigation. It's also come out that a lawyer named Frank Carone, who happened to have been Eric Adams' former chief of staff, represented Avant-Gardner as recently as 2020 in their disputes with the SLA and others. So Ariel Palitz, who's New York's founding director of the Office of Nightlife until this past March, she was asked about this very unusual meeting, and she said, quote, "That wasn't a good look, but this is New York. It's complicated. These are venues that are trying to run important businesses in our city and trying to survive," end quote. It's New York. It's complicated. It's corrupt. It is what it is. Let's not try to improve it. Let's just accept it and go with the flow. Eric Adams echoed these sentiments recently, publicly standing by his defense of the troubled Brooklyn venue, saying, quote, "I've said it over and over again. The backbone of this city really focuses on small businesses. If someone comes to our office because they need assistance, we are going to give them the legal assistance they need," end quote. Small businesses? I mean, does the massive 80,000-foot Avant-Gardner complex qualify as a small business? Like, maybe legally and in like tax terms, but are they small? Like, let's look at how much. So they said that they would generate $3.5 million in tax revenue for the state of New York. And what would that mean they must be bringing in every year in order to be able to estimate that they would be giving back to the city and the state $3.5 million? What's the tax rate in New York? I live here. It's quite high, but let's just do some math. Let's just do some quick math. Let's just do some mathing. Wow, I'm actually sorry that I did this because this is depressing. They add all sorts of new taxes. So like there's federal taxes for small businesses or businesses in New York. And then there's also like additional taxes that New York City just decides to add on whenever. Like starting in 2020, they made something called the business corporation tax, which would just be an additional tax on top of what businesses already paid in taxes. But basically, from what I can tell, the tax on businesses at this point was recently raised from 8.82 to 10.9%. So let's just use 10.9% because Avant-Gardner, like I said, is it a small business? Does it qualify as a small business? It's a pretty big business, and they probably make a crap ton more money than most businesses that would consider themselves small. So let's use 10.9 as a figure to start with. So I'm not the best at math. I'm actually the worst, but just off the top of my head, I would say that 3.5 million would be 10% of 350 million. So if you're a business making $350 million a year, are you qualified as a small business? Are you? I don't know. Now, according to the Small Business Association, most companies with 500 employees or fewer and most non-manufacturing companies with average annual receipts under 7.5 million will qualify as small business. However, there's exceptions by industry. I still don't think that Avant-Gardner could be considered a small business. If 7.5 million is the usual cutoff, I don't see how we can make that leap from 7.5 million to 350 million and say like they're a small business. Now, I don't know things about like business tax codes and stuff like that. I could be totally off base. Maybe they're not making $350 million a year. They probably also have a ton of write-offs that make their tax rate lower or make their, ultimate taxes that they pay out at the end of the year lower. But either way, I don't think they're a small business. And I think it's just convenient for Mayor Adams to call them a small business so he can look like he's helping out the little guy. Because what's happening here at Avant-Gardner and at the Mirage, outside of, what unfortunately happened to John Castic and to Carl Clementi, is that there is a danger. There's a danger posed to the patrons that are going there. And if you're not going to go out of your way to provide a ton of security and make sure that every single person who frequents your club at night isn't making it home safe, then we need to reevaluate whether you are a positive addition to the city or a negative one. So Mayor Adams also went on to say that basically like the SLA is too powerful, the state liquor authority is too powerful. He said he hoped one day New York City could just get rid of the SLA's authority over local venues, stating, quote, "I don't think people outside the city should be making the requirements on how it's enforced here," end quote. And I might agree with that partially, but the only problem is, which I can say as a resident of New York State, is the city is more than happy to take tax money from people outside of New York City. So why can't you take advice from them too? And the state liquor authority, that's like their job. You know, that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to decide if businesses that serve alcohol to people, which we know alcohol can cause a lot of bad things to happen, whether or not they're being responsible with their liquor license. And I would also like to point out, it was the Brooklyn Community Board, you know, the people in the city who live in the city, not only who live in the city, but who live in Brooklyn, where East Williamsburg is located. It was them that unanimously voted to not extend a liquor license to Avant-Gardner in the first place, while the SLA inevitably did anyways. So maybe if Eric Adams is concerned with people inside the city and what they think, he should listen more to the people who actually have to live and work in this area and be less concerned with whatever financial benefit the Avant-Gardner complex is providing to the city. But Avant-Gardner's problems did not end after their brushes with the SLA. In 2023, the Brooklyn Mirage was hit with a $7.5 million lawsuit. Apparently, during Pride Week this year, the club threw a big party called Allegra Pride 2023, and it drew in thousands of people. And from those people came numerous reports, I think hundreds of reports, of unwarranted and intrusive sexual assaults at the hands of the security guards that the Mirage had hired for the event. Jacob Chen, a lawyer from a New York firm called DGW Kramer, which is a smaller New York legal firm, he's been collecting these accounts, and he claims, quote, "Many attendees were touched repeatedly, sometimes without consent, and sometimes despite specifically refusing to consent, in their intimate areas, forced to spread their legs for extensive periods of time, and made to take off their pants and underwear, bare themselves, and show their genitals and buttocks to the security and anyone else nearby." Wow. He continues saying, quote, "Even inside the venue, attendees were subject to the continued abuse and mistreatment of security. For instance, when using bathroom stalls, security guards were constantly jumping over the wall or bending over to take a look inside stalls, peeking at the gap at the door, and banging on doors whenever attendees attempted to use the stalls," end quote. And you could say, like, listen, the Brooklyn Mirage is stressed. The SLA's on them. They're always talking about rampant drug use at this location, so the security guards are just being extra careful. You could say that. However, I feel that some of these things the security guards at the Brooklyn Mirage are being accused of doing are clearly not intended for the purposes of making sure people don't have drugs on them, right? It's a huge invasion of privacy. It's assault. It is. It's harassment. It's assault. It's horrible. And this is what happens sometimes when something gets too big. You know, you may have started out as a small business. You may have started out as this cool, edgy, underground, like events kind of planning business or whatever, and you were like the cool kids in town. But now you are not David. You are Goliath. And maybe your industry, maybe your complex has gotten so big so fast that you can no longer control it. You can't watch everything. You can't make sure that things are happening that are above board when everything's just so big, so wild. You've got lights, you've got music, you've got tons of people crushed into these small spaces. You do have drugs and alcohol that are running rampant. Like, for instance, they say on the FAQ page, you can bring in vapes, but you can't bring in, like, weed vapes. Well, how does anybody know the difference between a nicotine vape and a weed vape, right? Like, you don't always know the difference. They sometimes look identical. And I'm not saying that weed's going to cause people to go crazy. I mean, it might. You guys always correct me and you're like, some people do have like psychosis. Well, yeah, okay, that's the exception, not the rule. I'm not saying that weed's going to make people go crazy, but if you're able to slip certain things in, I slip stuff into places all the time, okay? Like, it is very easy to get certain things past security guards when they're dealing with like thousands of people that they're checking. So it happens all the time. So when you have these very unstable circumstances, you've got people and illicit substances, hallucinogenics sometimes, which can cause issues. You do have something that maybe has gotten too big and too out of control. And you have to start taking accountability and ownership for that. And you have to stop acting like you are the little guy being pushed around by the SLA or what have you. So word on the street is that the owners of the Mirage have burned their bridges with many locals, and they're only getting by based on their close relationship with Mayor Eric Adams, with an anonymous insider saying, quote, "I just think I've seen venues in the city over the years having to close their doors for issues that are much more minor and insignificant than this venue. The fact that this venue has been able to stay open with the deaths and all that, it's quite incredible. They must have a special relationship with the mayor," end quote. The shade. I love it. And yeah, that's pretty clear. I think there's favoritism happening. I think there's things being overlooked due to maybe the tax revenue or maybe something else. I don't know. Maybe Eric Adams is like really tight friends with Billy and Philip, and he loves raving out at the Mirage every weekend, and he just can't stand to see it leave Brooklyn. I don't know what his motive is. I don't know why he's going so hard for them, but he definitely is. And there are definitely other businesses that have been shut down for far less. Since the incidents with Carl Clementi, John Castic, and Michael Batista, Avant-Gardner has responded with an open letter to the community saying it is their top priority to ensure a safe experience for their guests, staff, and artists, and they have detailed plans for future security improvements, including setting up additional light towers in the vicinity of the club, working with the Taxi and Limousine Commission to deter unlicensed drivers, and implementing Wi-Fi access solutions to address the poor cell service in the area. And these are all great, because I do think that it sounds like an awesome idea. The whole Avant-Gardner complex sounds awesome. I bet you it's a ton of fun to be in there. It really does sound like a truly immersive experience. I know the EDM community goes hard. I know that the EDM community needs places like this to let go and to enjoy their passion. And I don't want to see it be taken away. But if you're going to exist, you have to be more responsible. You have to do better. And the fact that it took people dying for Avant-Gardner to address these situations when they've clearly been happening for a couple of years now, that is a problem. That's a problem, because now it looks like you're responding to bad publicity instead of an actual concern for the patrons who, attend your establishment. But hopefully Avant-Gardner has learned their lesson and they will start, attempting to keep people safe. And there is an aspect of personal responsibility to this as well. The kinds of people who go to this club, they have to be adults, right? They have to be of legal drinking age. So they're over 21. And people really should be more aware of their surroundings. They should kind of look at the area they're in and be like, this is an isolated area. This isn't like a super populated, super well-lit area. I have to plan ahead, make sure that I'm carpooling with people, make sure we stay in groups, make sure that I'm not really drinking too much or taking too many drugs where my, thought process is impaired. I need to have a clear head. I need to protect myself. So there has to be changes, I think, on everyone's part, but hopefully they'll be made. Now, as far as Carl Clementi and John Castic, do I believe that they encountered foul play? Well, I don't not believe it. It just seems too coincidental. It seems like, why would they go into the water? Were they crossing the bridge and fell in? I saw pictures of the Metropolitan Street Bridge that crosses Newtown Creek and the English Kills, and it doesn't look like you just accidentally fall into the water. Were they going down the banks? Were they very heavily impaired with drugs or alcohol and they just slipped into the water? At that point, why didn't they get out? Now, apparently, like I said, this is a very, very, very polluted creek. There's a lot of sludge in there. There's a lot of slime. It's very thick and hard to get out of, especially if you reach the creek bed. You could get stuck in that stuff, but I don't know what happened. There's a big chance that this wasn't foul play. It doesn't look like either of these men were attacked physically, physically hurt, besides the fact that they were, in the creek and they drowned. It doesn't appear that they were robbed. Why was John Castic not wearing a shirt? Has his shirt been found? Did he take his shirt off and decide to go swimming in the creek? Why would he do that as somebody who lived in New York and knows how dirty the East River is? I don't really know. I don't understand it. I wish that we were provided a little bit more information from the NYPD about this. But I will say, if you live in the area or if you go to the Brooklyn Mirage, just be careful. And that's just good old-fashioned common sense advice. Be careful, because I can't tell you for sure that these were accidents. I think it's a very big coincidence that two young men the same age, leaving the same place, would find themselves drowning in the same area. What would make them go into the water? Why would they both accidentally just fall into the water and then drown? It's very hard to understand. So that's all I'll say, I guess. Just be careful, be vigilant. I don't want anything to happen to you guys. I love you all, and I want you to go out and enjoy your EDM music. I wish I could do it with you, but I'm boring now. I want you to have a good life and experience all that there is to offer, but I want you to be careful and safe. So just try to do that. Well, let me know what you think about this in the comments. I know we talked about a lot today, so give me all your thoughts in the comment section. But before we go, we have our small business shout out, small business showcase, Stephanie's small business showcase. Woohoo! Today's small business showcase comes from Catherine. Catherine says she's been following me since way back when I only had 5,000 subs, and she found me through my Roanoke video, which was a very fun and interesting video to make. She says she always looks forward to my videos and to Crime Weekly's podcasts, and she plays my videos in the background while she's working, and what she's working on is her jewelry business. She makes acrylic earrings and home decor. She says she focuses mainly on pop culture, but she also sprinkles in some other designs too. Everything she makes is handmade. She cuts everything out on her machines, paints, assembles, and packs all orders herself. And she has an Instagram page, KGF Jewelry, as well as a website, which is kgfjewelry.com. Now, I will say what stood out to me about Catherine's work, what she offers, is how unique it is. Actually, it appears she goes by Cat on Instagram, which is cute, so I'm going to call her Cat. These are very unique pieces of jewelry, and the first thing that caught my eye, not just because it happens to be the first thing on her Instagram page, were these earrings that are, it's the girl from The Ring standing in front of a TV with like static on it. The Ring, I think, is one of the best horror movies ever. It is one of my favorite horror movies. That shit scared the living daylights out of me back then, and it still does now, right? So a lot of movies you watched when you were younger, you're like, oh, these are so good. Like Twilight, for instance. I know people are going to hate on me for this. I'm not hating on Twilight. I loved the books. I'm not going to lie. But when I watched the movies back in the day, I was like, whoa, these movies are so good. And I tried watching them recently, and I was like, this is like awkward. Like the acting is like stiff and awkward. Just the whole setup. I mean, it is visually stunning still. I still think that the way the Twilight movies were shot is really cool. But yeah, I can't do it. I can't watch them anymore. But The Ring, man, it endures. It endures. As a lover of horror movies, I also love the acrylic scream earrings. Like, I am going to have to place an order. Stat. The ghost face earrings are going to be like my October staple, I can tell you right now. But aside from that, she's got a bunch of cool stuff. Like, also, it seems like Kat loves everything I love, because she's got Animal Crossing jewelry here. So freaking cute. She's got Jack the Skeleton dangly earrings, for the Nightmare Before Christmas. She's got these cute little like pumpkin trick-or-treat pal earrings that are dangly ones. Are those hedgehog earrings? Oh my God, Aiden, my son, loves hedgehogs. Like, she has Are You Afraid of the Dark earrings. Like, this is actually going to be a problem for me, because when I go upstairs and start transferring these files so that Nev can start editing it, I'm going to place quite a large order. And this is stuff that you wouldn't see normally just like in stores. These are really unique pieces that would make great gifts for yourself in my situation, or for like people who enjoy unique gifts, because I'm always looking to get somebody something that like they can't find anywhere else, because I like to stand out like that. And there's tons of stuff on here that's just so unique that you wouldn't see anyplace else, that I think would make amazing gifts for people in your life, or for yourself, or for me. If you want to send me some stuff from the shop, go ahead and do it. So yes, go check Catherine out. Go check out her Instagram page and her website. I'll link everything in the description box below. Thank you so much for being here. Subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video if you liked it. Share it if you think it's worth sharing. And stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe. I'll see you very, very soon.
it goes until it's killing you slowly. So you got to let it go. I got blood on the strings, blood on the strings,